Hello future tech leaders, I am Sindhuja. Based on my own experience, I know that learning the right skills can shape our future. What if I say learning was as thrilled as the tech world itself? There we go. A cloud foundation, that's exactly what you will experience. From day one, you will be immersed in the interactive sessions and expert-led courses that covers most of the widely used technologies in the zone of data science to cloud computing, which brings more light to the life of a techie. I'm so excited to help you and unlock the true potential of a technology. Well, then why to wait? Let's see what it unfolds.
Subflows and variables is very important concept. Second concept I would like to cover about HTTP request component. Once you finish this one, I will go to the API area. That is the agenda. Let me briefly, in 5 minutes, let me recap what we discussed so far in the last session. See, we start our journey with understanding the message processing. So message processing is very important. Why we start the message processing? Reason is Mule need to process different kinds of messages, not only a single kind of message. We need to understand different kinds of messages. So what we discussed is there is a flow component. Is there? Flow is a very basic component of the Mule. It will receive and process the message from external. So the flow component contains primarily 3 sections. The first section is a source section and second section is a process section and third section is the Mule section. The source section depends upon the source from where we are receiving the message. Based on the source where we are getting message. If the message is coming from HTTP, we place the candidate that is able to understand the HTTP message. That is HTTP listener. We place HTTP listener. Based on the source, we configure this source component. So what the source component will do, it will receive the HTTP message. But this HTTP message is not understandable by the process components. Process components understand only Mule message, Mule event message. The source component will transform the incoming message to the Mule event message or Mule message and hand over to the process components. Process components will work on that. This is one of the basic. This is the first point we covered. And the second point is how the event components look like. It contains 3 sections. See, once the source creates the event component. The Mule event component contains 3 sections. It is very important. Attribute section. Attribute is, and the payload. Payload section. Variable. Variable section. To access the specific section, we need to use expression language. That is as in square bracket, put the payload here so that we can able to retrieve the content of the payload. So this is Mule event is very important. This will travel across your flow from starting to ending. Everything happens on the Mule event object and at the end the process completes. What happens? The last component gives the Mule event back to you, your resource component. Source component again transforms that to the HTTP message and sends back to layer response. HTTP response back to the client. Okay, so last point. You've seen that after it gets processed, right? Yeah, right? It sends back to the requester or the connector. Exactly. So this request, yeah. So the client doesn't understand the Mule event, right? Yeah. So what is going to do again? Once again transforms the way the client understands. So that again has HTTP request, HTTP response, and then sends back its response to the postman or whatever component. Alright. So when it sends back to the HTTP or to the listener or whatever, or the source, when it sends back to the source, then is that format. Is the Mule formatted message, or is it going to be like? Is it going to be transferred to another format, or is it going to be Mule event? Yeah, the Mule event is not understandable by your source component, right? If you use the Mule event component source, this source understands the Mule event. What this guy do again, it transforms the Mule event back to HTTP message. Okay, got it? So when it sends back, it will be HTTP message, correct? So the listener understands HTTP. Correct. Because that's what the original source was. Got. So basically, this is the concept we discussed in the last session. Now let me extend the session and discuss about. The first component is the subflows and variables. First, we'll talk about the subflows and variables. Okay? So let me open my slide on subflows and variables. So we'll talk about what is subflow, and next is how to call a subflow and what are variables and the link between subflows and variables. So this is again on the offline session. Now we discussed about what is subflow. So as your developer, right? So in your program, maybe Java or NNT, Java or Python, whatever programming language, you have a requirement like a piece of code that used multiple places in your application. The same piece of code used in multiple places in your application. So, do you write that piece of code everywhere it requires, or do you write in one place and you call that with the first? So, how you do? Usually we write something like methods or functions, right? You know methods or functions in programming languages. So why we do the methods and functions? The same piece of logic, same logic is using multiple places in your application. So we won't write the duplicate logic everywhere. What we'll do? We write that logic in one piece, okay, in one place. That we call it a method, and this method is called wherever it is required. Right? So this uses the reusability of your code. Right. So what is the advantage of reusability? Is it gives your application more consistency. For example, this is the code that is connected to some database. Using this code, you are connected to the database. So you need to change something in the database configuration like password or database whatever. So what happens is, if you write the same code in multiple places, you want to do some change. You need to go and change everywhere in every place, right? Sometimes developers do change here and here, then they forget to do here, so that the code is not consistent, right? Yeah, so what the fundamental is, we need to wrap that common piece of code in one place, and we need to use that from that place. Similarly, in the Mule, to make a reusable component, that reusable component is Subflow. A subflow is simply nothing but a block of reusable logic. That's right, yeah. So ideally we discuss about flow. Flow contains 3 sections. Flow contains sections like a event source, because it has to receive message from external world, right? And in case of Subflow, do you think Subflow also requires event source? No, it has to be the main source. Yeah. Subflow is simply a reusable logic so that it doesn't need an event source. Only a set of event processors only. That's right. So there is a main flow that can call the subflow. Excellent. Fantastic, Adam. Main flow uses a subflow. So therefore, subflow doesn't require the event source. It won't get message from external world. Only the main flow is a candidate to get the message from external world. It will use as the subflow. Right. So I have one more flow, one more main flow. This main flow also may call subflow. Same logic, yeah. This is flow A and flow B. Flow A is using this logic and flow B is also using this logic. I can call this subflow in multiple flows wherever this logic is required. Yeah. Now one more very important point. In subflows, most of people confuse and they misunderstand this. This point is very key to understand. Please listen carefully. So usually, if you are from Java background or Python background, what we do is we write some methods like this. For example, some method. Some method takes integer a and integer b. What this some method do is, it returns a plus integer b. Something like this logic will be there here. I call the sum of passing 3 and 4. So what it returns? Something like 7, right? So here, if you are from the programming language background, it is nothing, but we are calling this functionality, passing these as inputs to this method. And whatever execution happens here, and the execution result will back to the main where we call it. Yeah, right. So if I'm collecting over here, index is equal to sum. Now x is equal to 7 over here. It's like this usually in programming languages, but there is some difference in the Mule. Mule works in different way. It is like this. For example, I have some main. Main form. Main form is receives a message from external world. From some postman, I sent some message. So what happens is I write a subflow. And I have some components over here. Some components define the subflow. I will tell you what is a component, what different kinds of components are available. Okay, this is main flow. This is subflow. So what happens is I have a component called the flow reference. Using the flow ref component, I can invoke or I can refer the subflow. Use this flow ref component. The flow ref component will ask which flow you want to refer. Here I can tell, okay guys, please refer this flow subflow. And this flow has name. Subflow is the name of this flow. And I use the reference as subflow. If you can see, you can refer the subflow. So to configure to call the subflow, what happens is here, whatever the components inside the subflow. There are 4 components here, right? These 4 components will come and replace this component. Now the flow is like this. So wherever if you refer a subflow, all the subflow components will become a part of the main flow. Okay, now the Mule event comes and travels like this from this and this. So these 4 components are from subflow, right? But if you refer a subflow, all the subflow components become part of the main flow. This is the point we need to understand. Yeah, but I have a question. I understand exactly what the flow reference means here. Yeah. But even though it's going to function like the subflow with a flow reference, like you said, when you have a flow reference, whatever that it's referenced to, it will look like it's in part of the main flow, right? Yeah, but that's maybe a logical way. But when you're designing, you have to have a subflow, right? Correct, yeah. And so, for example, when you create a main flow like this and say that, for example, you have a second component, for example, you put the flow reference. And the flow reference will talk to the subflow and do what it's supposed to do, and then return the information to the main flow. Yeah, it's like it's not going there and coming back the information to the main flow. It's not like that. When you refer a subflow, all the subflow components will come and sit over here in the main flow. The flow reference place. It replaces the flow reference. Wow. Okay, I'm with you, but somehow, because the other example you gave, which like most of the subfunctions or subflows or subroutines, all that stuff that we have for other programs. You know the subprograms, subroutines. Usually it's outside the main program. It does the calculation and you get the return or the answer back to the main. Here you're saying that you might design it as a subflow. But once you have a flow reference, everything that's inside that flow reference, configuration within the subflow, all that component they will be like logically in the main flow, or they will be like all that information will programmatically or system wise, they will be part of the main flow. Yeah, so once you configure a flow reference, so what happens is the logically, all the flow reference components will become part of the main flow. Subflow components will become part of the main flow. So sometimes then, if that's the case, yeah, sometimes you don't have to use a flow reference. But we need to use a flow reference to refer the subflow. Without using flow reference, you can't refer subflow. Yeah. Alright, I'm with you. I'm just challenging you. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, let's discuss. Yeah, I think I now understand. Anyway, the point here is that if there's a subflow, is there a flow reference in the main flow? Anything that I refer to them and flow reference. I need to think like it's in the main flow within the main flow. Yeah, got it. So let me go back to the slides. Subflow used to compress usable logic in application when subflow is invoked from another flow. The subflow components become part of the calling flow. Calling flow is the main flow. Subflow doesn't have source and error had exceptions. Because subflow is not an independent component. Somebody should, give input to subflow. Sorry, somebody need to call the subflow. Subflow is invoked using a flow reference common computation logic inside the subflow. It would invoke by many flows. Many flows wherever it needs that logic. Subflow is not a single component. Let me show the subflow component. Simple subflow component. It's a simple box. Nothing is there, right? Yeah. I have one quick question. Yeah, sure. Is there like a subflow? Yeah, wonderful question. I'm coming to that point only. Okay, alright. Very passionately listening. I appreciate your humble. That's nice. Here, what happens is if you use a flow reference, the flow reference referring the subflow, and whatever component inside the subflow. Now, in this scenario, there is only one component, the set payload component. But probably it may have multiple components also. All these components will come and replace the flow reference. So after the flow reference, how the flow looks like is listener, set, payload and logger. It becomes like that to visualize. You can realize the flow, right? Listener and the set payload replaces the flow, reference and logger. The flow becomes like that, the flow reference. Got it. I see. Okay, now the question I come to. I want to answer the question. It's like this, yeah. So usually we thought that the flow will refer sub flow reference and subflow can refer another subflow. Or even a subflow can refer a flow. But there will. So then, if that's the case, say that you have a main flow and you have a flow reference to subflow. Then you're going to create another flow reference inside the subflow. Correct. And then remember the logic that the subflow references will be part of the main flow. So the second subflow within the subflow. I'm sorry. So if you have a flow reference in the subflow, right? Does that mean then whatever in the flow reference, that subflow information. It will be part of the main or it will be. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I explained well, but yeah. Are you following me? Yeah, I'm following you. The point you taught me now was that every time you have a flow reference and there's a subflow there, any component in the subflow, they will be part of the main flow, right? Now let's say we introduce subflow, right? So the first subflow, we have a flow reference. Yes, and that flow reference is pointing to second subflow, right? So the component of the second subflow, is it going to be part of the first subflow or is going to be part of the main flow? Component of the second subflow. It might be see I will have a sweep first. So using the flow reference, right? You can refer a flow can refer a subflow or a flow can refer another main flow. It's not always, it's not like that. Using flow reference, flow only refer to subflow. Flow can refer another main flow. Okay, that's first point, okay. And second point is the flow can refer a subflow. In subflow, we will put some other flow reference component. Using that, we can refer one more subflow. Yeah, that's right. Or using this flow reference component, we can refer a flow also. Either whatever. Okay. So if you have a flow, you may have one flow reference. That is calling one flow or one subflow. Yeah. And you can put one more flow reference to call another subflow. And this subflow has one more flow reference that is calling another subflow. And this flow reference has one more calling one more subflow. It's like this, okay. So, but the point I want to understand is that on these subflows about this one, yeah. If you have a flow reference, okay, yeah, is the logic that wherever you assign or create a flow reference, the flow reference will look like the component of the subflow will be part of the wherever you define the flow reference, right? Right? Yeah. So, for example, if you could in this diagram here, if you could make the say that, for example, like if you put this is the main one in one down, maybe call it A here. So what happens is, see, assume this final subflow has three components. Whatever these three components will come and occupy over here in this space. That's right. That's my question. That's good. So whenever you configure the flow reference, right? Right, yeah. All the components will move to the subflow that you configure. The flow reference, correct. Now, all this will move over here and all this will move over here. This will become like this wave flow. So it can go to any level. It is not like it is supposed to stop at one point. No, it will tool to any level. But what happens is whenever the flow reference, they are all replaced by all the subflow components replaced by the flow reference. It will go like this, right? So when, for example, when flow is referring other flow, not subflow, right, as in the flow is referring other main flow. Yeah, what happens is in that case only the process components take into consideration the source ignored. Only the process. Whatever the process section, this will become part of over here. It will come over. Sit over here. It's good also. Okay, but my little question also is that there should be only one main flow, right? in the flow. In your application. Yeah, in my application. It's not the rule is not like not there. You can have multiple main flows in your application. Okay, yeah, multiple main flows. But ideally, when you develop an API, it will create only one main flow for application and all the requests will go with the outer. Okay, and the router routes all the request different subflows. Let me show you one other project. Wow. Over here. See, this is only main flow. This is the only flow that will take request from the external world and it routes the request to different other flows. See, this is also main flow, but the source is not defined over here. Okay, so if there is no source means it can't receive message from external world. If the main flow is defined but there is no source means it won't get the message from external world. But internally one flow can refer other flow. This kind of flows we call a private flow. So this is only called inside your application only. That's why okay. So this is not and also it's not a subflow. It's not a subflow. What is that? Is it private? Is it a private flow? What is it? It's not a main flow only. If you want, you can put some configuration, some source here. That option is there over here. But subflow, there is no such option. If you can't do subflow, there is no source component itself. You can't put a source to this component, but the main flow your wish. You want to configure a source. If you want to receive message from a specific source system, you configure a source. If you don't want, you don't configure. So this one like the RobMQ. This one that the post message application. So what is it getting the input from the other flow can call this flow. So here your router is calling this flow. But you may have a main flow. And for example, this is one flow, this is one flow. So I can call this flow from here. Okay, I put a flow reference. And I can call in the flow reference. I can configure that on the post messages. So what happens is this will call this flow. So we will talk about that one, don't worry. Excellent, thank you. Now it's very fascinating. It's a lot of options, but you got to know how they communicate, how the route works. Correct? Practice all these basic things and it will, that's what I said, you will know. You will also. Wow, I cannot wait to master the year. And hope you got the concept of subflow right. Yep, I do. Just blindly remember one thing. The subflow can be called in the flow reference component. Right? When you use the flow reference component, if you refer any subflow, all the components of subflow will come and replace the flow reference component. Got? That's right. So let me show you a simple application demo here. I have already developed two applications. What I will do is, I will configure one flow reference. Let me show the flow reference component. Flow reference component. See here? Just focus on these two flows only. This flow name is demo project flow 2. Just I'm changing some flow. Yeah, for our readable devices. Right? So what happens is I've configured one flow reference component. If we click on the flow reference component, it will show you the properties to configure. It is asking the flow name, means which flow you want to refer here in the flow reference component. I need to configure the flow name, right flow or subflow. Here I have subflow. This subflow name is subflow. I'm configuring. I want to refer that one I can call like subflow. So what happens? This will call the subflow. Only one thing you need to tell is you need to tell what is the flow name you want to refer in the flow reference component. Here. So the target value. Yeah, that I will tell. After variables, we have the variables topic. Oh, after variable, I'll come back to that one. Now coming to the variables. What is your idea of variables Mule in any programming language? To store information, right? Excellent, fantastic. To store the information that is required in your application after some time or whenever we want to retrieve that information. That kind of information we store inside variables. Right, yeah. Similar thing applies in the Mule also. In Mule also, if you want to store something. And finally, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.